7:59. Call this meeting to order, and so, present is Gene Lawson, Sandy Bieber, Sturgis Stives, Susan Wood, and Chair Hoyte Decker. And I'm going to call for a motion in a second, I hope, for the set of minutes, and I hope that, speaking of stuff that got in here, I hope Sandy, your
Yep, they're there.
changes are in there?
Yeah.
Okay, we good? So can I get a motion, please? Maybe a second? Anybody?
A motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All right, hang on one second. Hey, Sandy. Susan. Okay, so, motion and second. Everybody in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? No? Okay. Let me sign this guy. Okay. All right. No correspondence. One organizational note on the next Board of Commissioners regular meeting, which is, I believe, the 18th. They're going to reconstitute committees, and so I'm going to be submitting all the names except for Sandy. Is that correct? Everybody good? Okay. All right. So let's just jump right in with our tree ordinance business. I'm putting on the table 3 different items. The first one is definitions, specifically definitions for a protected tree, part of 253.24, and then tree removal, section 253.30, and finally tree protection and mitigation, 253.35. And before we start looking at documents and responding to some of the comments that have been filed, I just want to give you at least my idea of how I was moving forward on this, and I must say it was based on conversations and meeting with the city arborist, Liz Lingo, and most recently with Sturgis and Liz about these issues. And so I think what we're trying to do here is to simplify and clarify the provisions that we're going to address today. And to that end, I have with Liz's help, and to some degree Sturgis as well, come up with a definition which is really simplified, hopefully it's clarified, for a protected tree. And then I have moved into the other 2 provisions with the concept that what we're going to do in the end is not try and force property owners to either plant numerous replacement trees and or pay mitigation fees for or in place of tree plantings, but rather to, at the point where the tree is removed, to assess fees or make charges for the removal of a tree or trees. And then when it comes to tree replacement, to simply have one tree and make sure that at least one of the trees that's going to be on the property is going to be a type of tree for a canopy. And Susan, we can get into that as well. So let me open it up for discussion if whoever wants to go first. I know both Sandy and Sturgis had given some comments about this, so I don't care who wants to go first on this? Would you like to go?
I'd actually like to hear more of your explanation about all the changes and the sort of the journey you've taken on this section.
Well, ask me a question. I'm not sure how to respond to you.
Well, it's unclear to me. I take your point that you have now removed mitigation entirely, but now you've put in this fee proposal, including this escrow agreement, which I think is horribly onerous, has no guidelines, and is, subject to an awful lot of trust on discretion without any accountability, which worries me a lot. And you're telling a property owner that they have to put up somewhere between $600 and $6,000 with the city, and then they have to do a tree replacement again with their own funds. They can't use that money that they've escrowed. And then, if the city arborist approves the whole arrangement, then they may get their money back. I think that if somebody doesn't do a tree replacement the right way, that we have civil penalties and fines to deal with that.
Okay.
I think this whole thing is punitive, and I would hope that we would not propose this as a change to this section.
Okay.
I'm all for getting rid of mitigation, but I think in this whole notion of replacement, before we get there, we have to have a general agreement as a committee about where we're going. Because this whole notion of what is a protected tree, what is tree, how does tree density figure into this? What are we really trying to achieve? I mean, I once asked city officials, if every property in this town had 3 trees, would you consider this a great achievement if one of those 3 trees, at least one, was a canopy tree? They thought that would be wonderful. So I start from the basis that most properties in this town are 5,000 square feet. Under current density requirements, unless we change those, that requires 3 trees. If we said you have to have 3 trees, and one of those trees is a canopy tree, and in the event one of those 3 trees has to be removed or replaced for some reason, it can be disease, it can be you're building an extension, you're redoing your landscaping, and you just want to have things differently, then you should replace at least one of those trees. And if the tree that you are removing is a protected tree, my view is that you should then plant a tree of comparable quality and style. In other words, another canopy tree, but get rid of this whole notion of caliber and DBH, because you can't take a tree that may be 20-inch caliper and now tell people, I'll say 21 so I can divide this by 3, 21-inch caliper, and then say, oh, but you've got to now plant 7 trees of 3 inches in its place. I think what we need to say to people is you need to plant a comparable tree, because our whole motivation here is to have this, a certain density and a certain canopy in the city. And we have to realize that if you remove a 21-inch caliper tree and you plant another tree that in, say, 10 years will look about, be getting the same place, that's what you want. You don't want 7 trees, 6 of which are going to choke out each other. You want to have something that is reasonable to people. And this whole regime, to me, of having these fees and filing plans and so on, I think is just too much for most property owners. I just think it's the supplemental fees on top of the replacement fees. I just think is much too much. And I mean, I have followed your progression, which is why I asked you to discuss it. But I mean, I looked at what you proposed and had us discuss at the August 7th meeting. I see where you have made changes from that August 7th meeting draft to today's draft. I think you're positive in the right direction, but you've added all this other stuff now, which I think only complicates it further.
Okay.
So that's my piece.
Okay, thank you. So that you've raised a number of points, and I'm probably gonna forget some of them as I go through.
All right, I have them
I
all
know you'll
here in the
remind me.
memo that
I know
sent
you're
you.
good.
Right.
So, my basic concept here is to try and preserve the trees that we have, okay? And so my first point would be, I believe that beyond 3 trees, it's important to continue to preserve trees in the city, okay? So if you have more than 3 trees on your property, and they qualify as what I'm defining as a protected tree, I think you need to have to go through this process, okay?
Well, that's where you and I have a fundamental disagreement.
Yeah, okay.
Because
I mean, that's
you're
where I
telling,
come in.
you're telling somebody who may have, have a partially wooded lot, and now they want to, it's overgrown, and they have volunteer growth, and they want to clean this up, and they want to better landscape it, or they want to add a porch, all of which is consistent with zoning, and you're going to penalize those people versus,
No.
yes, you
No.
are, versus people who have the bare minimum.
Okay. So if a person wants to change the footprint of their house, they have to do that within the law. But to the extent, I mean, I think I've dealt with that in terms of how the tree removal would be affected by a change in the footprint of the property, okay? When you're talking about clearing out volunteer, all that kind of stuff, I'm totally with you. We had the tree professionals come in here and tell us all about, I forget the term they used, for essentially what's a volunteer tree. So, I don't know that unless it's a volunteer that's greater than 6 inches, then we might have issues that we need to talk about. But I think, there's.
Well, but
There's
you've defined a
positive-
protected tree as 2 inches.
I'm sorry?
You defined a protected tree as 2 inches. So I will tell you, most volunteer growth is at least 2 inches in caliber.
Where am I? I need my paperwork here. So any tree that is 2 inches, I'm reading from my definition, it's part A, that is 2 inches caliper or more, which is necessary to meet the density requirements, okay? If you met the density requirements, then you have to have a tree that's 6 inches or greater.
So you mean, if a tree is meeting your density requirements and it's 2 inches in diameter, that's a protected tree. If it's beyond the 3 trees in the average lot,
Right.
that are necessary for tree density, you're saying every other tree, alive or dead, by the way your draft says, that is 6 inches in dBH, which is different than caliber, but
Yes, it
says,
is, yes.
that those are also protected trees and that people have to go through the same process?
If it's greater than 6 inches, yes.
I think I was hoping that we were moving to a place that would make things easier for the citizens of this town. I'm not sure we aren't doing the opposite. We're making things even more difficult.
More difficult. Yeah, well, maybe we are making it more difficult, but on balance, I'm viewing that as a trade-off for trying to preserve the trees.
This may be the time to give you my
By
2
all
cents.
means,
Just
by all
since-
means.
I wasn't going to, but since Sandy brought up his option, I'm going to
Sure.
bring up mine.
Sure,
And
by
then
all
we'll get
means.
back to finishing everything else we have. This was just something that I roughed out, but I'm going to reread it. You guys can't read it because my handwriting's too nasty, but I had done this a few weeks ago. This would be trashing pretty much all of this, and then just starting with a very simple tree thing. And I just wrote, I had something written up about the goal is to maintain and protect, the city as we see it with the trees and all the value and all that stuff, which would also be part of the beginning of the code. So, but I just had every residential lot shall maintain a minimum of percentage canopy So blank percentage, whatever we came up with.
Okay.
Okay, every residential lot shall maintain a minimum of blank percentage tree canopy and a minimum of blank listed trees obtainable within blank years of planting. Okay, so in other words.
Can you read that again?
Yeah, in other words, what it basically says is every residential lot has to have, I'm gonna throw some numbers in to make it make sense. So every residential lot shall maintain a minimum of 20% tree canopy and a minimum of 3 listed trees obtainable within 5 years of planting. So in other words, you have to have, within 5 years of planting your trees, your 20% of your lot must be covered with a canopy, and you have to do it with at least 3 trees.
20% of your lot is
I'm just
covered?
throwing out the
No,
percentage.
I want to understand.
The canopy.
The canopy actually
20%,
covers 20% of
whatever
your
the
lot.
percentage is that we feel it should be, 5%, I don't know what that percentage is, okay? But basically, we say if it's a 5,000 square foot lot, we want everybody's 5,000 square foot lot to have a canopy of, 500 square feet on their property somewhere, okay? You can get that with as many trees as you want, but you have to have at least 3, okay? And if it's a new property, when you plant it, it's got to be there within 5 years. So it would take a little bit of a tree list for this area, what tree can grow to a certain size. You'd have to have a list, okay? But there's plenty of research. I'm sure you could say an oak tree planted in Rehoboth beach soil will reach a canopy of 20 foot within 5 years. I'm not sure it's not going to be that much, but whatever it is. And again, I'm not an arborist, so we would need somebody to figure that out, okay? I went on to say 1/2 of the canopy of a street tree may be included toward the percentage of the canopy. So if you have 2 street trees that are each have a canopy of, again, I can't do the numbers for the canopies, 50 square feet each, and we were getting toward 500, half of that would be included, which would, so you wouldn't be penalized for having street trees since you have to maintain them, all right? And then, in addition, any existing trees deemed protected or historic, whatever you want to call them, that is not within the buildable lot area must remain and be maintained. So if you have a big old fat tree that is not within where you're going to put your house or your pool or your shed, you have to leave it,
So.
period.
So long as it's healthy.
Yeah.
So, if I'm understanding you, so it would be, if for a 5,000 foot lot, 20% would be.
I don't know what the
1,000
percentage
No,
is.
let me just, I'm responding to you.
I have a picture.
1,000
help.
feet, 1,000 feet, 1,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Some of which might be taken up by a street tree.
Half of us, I would say a certain percentage.
okay.
I wouldn't give all of the street tree
So,
canopy towards that
so beyond
canopy.
that, I mean, if you could do that with 1 or 2 trees,
You have to, no, there's a minimum number of trees as well,
you would still have a minimum number
Yeah,
of trees.
okay? Every residential lot shall maintain a minimum of blank percentage of canopy
All right. But
Okay.
beyond that,
and a minimum of blank listed trees. So
right.
if you have 1 tree that makes everything, it doesn't matter. You still have to have 2 more
Yeah,
trees
but,
somewhere.
so what I'm gonna do is try and bring this back to what Sandy's saying.
It's similar
so-
to what he said, except
Yeah,
I'm
no,
using
I agree.
percentages, not number of trees.
But beyond that number, beyond the 20%, beyond the 3 trees.
You can do whatever you
You
want
can
with
do
your
whatever you
property.
want, so that's what
that's-
you're saying
that's better.
in a little different.
It's a very interesting approach, Susan. I think we need to get some expert advice on what the right number is, because remember that most houses in town were built under the old zoning code, which allowed 60% lot coverage. So we're only talking about 40% of what's called natural cover left on any one lot.
Okay.
So we really have to think about what really
So
is
then maybe
right.
5%
But if
is
you
the number.
plant a tree,
Well, no, let me, yeah.
Maybe 5% is the number. If you're down to 40% of your lot that you can't build on, if that's what's left, after pools and sheds and everything else,
No, 40% is the free,
Yeah.
and the old one. Now it's 50% depending upon factors.
right. Well, when I drew it out with the setbacks, as the setbacks were designed, again, this also plays into the other part of the code that I was in favor of totally eliminating, which was this FAR calculation. which I
Far.
think is absolutely insane.
She's in zoning code.
You know, I'm back into that, but by increasing, you know, if allowing, you know, basements and height and extra space that people. I'm off topic. Okay. Well, anyway, what I was getting at was setbacks. If you have to increase the setbacks to do that, it would be okay if you could get the square footage. Can I say that? The square footage of what people need for their bigger houses in other ways. That's what I was getting at with that. Okay. So maybe because the setbacks are small, it's difficult to get a nice big tree in between your lot and your neighbor's lot. Okay, but if under new construction, perhaps they redid the way they calculated that, your setbacks could be bigger and you could fit trees, if that is on subject.
On day one,
So,
we have this new law that follows your model. What do you do with all the people who are not in compliance? Because there are a lot of properties that won't meet that standard.
the same thing you do in every law has changed, it's
See,
just
this grandfather.
it's grandfathered in,
Okay, I just want to be sure
you know, and people can get a survey or whatever they want
I
to
just want to
grandfather.
be sure you weren't taking a radical approach.
No,
So-
you grandfathered all in.
Okay.
You can't take back what people
To
have.
pick up on that a little bit, so, I forget what the setback is in the back, but it's like 20 feet or something like that, 10 feet, 15 feet. If you put a canopy tree in the backyard, you could and your 5 years might not be long enough to get
Yeah, I don't know
the
what that
canopy
number is.
fully
No,
mature.
it's not.
But, at some point, you could get your 20% with one tree in the backyard.
You have to have at least, I also said, and a blank number of trees, which we would have to say. When I drew it with, again, I'm going back to zoning code, which stop me if I can't, but when I drew it with the setbacks that we have, I was able to fit in a house, a pool, a shed, 3 trees, and half a street tree.
Well,
come up
the
with,
current tree density for, as I said earlier, for a typical 5,000 square foot Rehoboth lot is 3 trees. So I mean, I would start with that as your sort of baseline, work from there, because that was done, I mean, unless we're gonna, as a committee, suggest changing that, but I mean, if you assume that that's sort of your baseline, then any one of or more of those 3 trees has to meet this canopy requirement as opposed to being a canopy tree. I was just saying it has to be a canopy tree. You're saying it has to be a canopy tree, but we may need another canopy tree if the first canopy tree doesn't reach this percentage thing.
You have to have 3.
No, 3 trees.
Yeah,
You didn't say 3 canopy trees.
3 canopy trees.
Oh, that's too, I will tell you, that's too
Yeah.
much.
Wait a minute. Now,
But,
if you-
but there's other trees that,
No, that's too
but
much.
Ken,
Yeah,
You can't do that.
but there's trees that are canopy trees that cover, they don't have to be huge trees.
You can't do that.
But you
Yeah.
could get one that maybe gives you 1,500 square feet and 2 more trees that may not be canopy trees, but nevertheless will provide enough canopy to give you another 500
I'm going to
square
defer to my fellow expert Sturgis here.
Okay,
Well,
all right.
I'm percolating here.
What's a
Yes,
definition
you
of
are.
canopy tree?
Well, I mean, this, you asked a good question.
Anything that covers the ground is a
What's-
canopy tree, correct?
Well, it depends on what we want to define that as.
Right.
It depends, I mean, because, you know, what I would like to see us do is have what I would call a high canopy tree. Now, Liz has offered a possible definition of that, which would be something to consider, a tree that would reach 45 feet minimum at maturity and have a spread of 20 feet minimum of crown. So, I mean, that's a very
Is that a
specific.
diameter, a 20-foot diameter or radius?
No.
They usually do radius for canopies.
Okay. I'd
So
have
that's
to- I'd
40
have to-
feet.
I'd have to look, let me see.
Again, these are all calculations that,
These are
that somebody else can figure out that
Yeah,
knows
we-
something about
yeah.
trees.
But I'm just kind of saying
But-
is that I think it makes a difference, you know, if we're looking for a certain effect, then how we define a canopy tree or the desired canopy tree makes a difference. And we haven't settled on that at this point. Just a couple of things I just wanted to say in terms of could we have 3 canopy trees on a lot? I agree with Sandy. I don't think we can. And even the Planning Commission's previous revision asked for 3 shade trees.
Or maybe
which were-
shade's the word that I'm
Okay,
looking
well,
for.
well,
I like the word.
okay.
That's really different.
However, these shade trees were supposed to be able to reach 30 feet height at minimum in maturity, and I don't even think you could get 3 of those. So I think that was, I know what they were trying to approach canopy, but in making all 3 of them shade trees.
What are the big street trees? Those aren't canopy trees?
What are the big street trees?
I would
Oh, you mean
count
the
it-
Zelkovas?
The big street trees
The
that are,
ones on Rehoboth Avenue?
yeah, what are those? They don't,
Those are Zelkovas. and
but they don't get any canopy grading?
Oh, yeah, I mean, and they could get huge. I mean, Zelkovas can get huge. I mean, and again, you've probably got different varieties. I would hope the ones on Rehoboth Avenue aren't the ones that are gonna get huge, because there's not room for them. But, you know, I think the thing that makes this confusing is that all of this kind of started out and stems from the Davy Tree Company coming in here in 2010, because there was a concern about trees being cut down during redevelopment. So there was a concern that we maintain and preserve and protect a certain amount of canopy based on Davy Tree's recommendation. And at that time, it was, you know, we want to reach 40%, I think, within 10 years or exceed that. So, you know, what was happening, so at some point about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, they changed the satellite imagery. And they ended up being able to get better pictures in order to, and that's how they kind of calculate the canopy. And they said, well, you guys have already met it. Before we were, you know, we hadn't, then all of a sudden we had.
With the new technology?
With the new technology. Now, the thing is about the technology is it may not be able to distinguish. You know, it kind of looks down.
It's two-dimensional.
It looks down and it sees.
So it could be a 4-foot high tree with a 20-foot.
Yeah, I
canopy.
mean, so there may be some challenges because it looks down and sees green.
But why
leaves.
can't that count? That's what I'm saying. I don't know what you call it, but why can't that count?
It can, but I guess the challenge is as you're saying, how do we maintain 40% canopy with whatever formula we come up with?
Well,
And
that's
if we can do that with 3 trees per lot, and if we.
What's the 40%? I'm lost on
Oh,
that.
okay.
40% of what? No, but 40% of what?
Okay, well, let me just ask you a question.
Maybe-
Before we
maybe
get
the
technical
the
here.
worst area of the town, the
Is it
square
even-
mile.
Is it even
Okay,
an
first
idea that
part.
you guys would consider? Before we get technical on the number and
yeah.
what counts and what percentage, is it even an approach that you would consider? Because if it's not, we're just wasting our time talking about it, and we should get back to doing these definitions of caliper and
I'm
everything
totally
else.
open to considering it. I'm also totally open, yes, you're saying,
I was
they're
gonna
totally
s-
open to your concept as well, if it gets us to that kind of a goal.
See, I think what I was suggesting is easier for compliance, because a lot of times you'll plant a tree, and Sturgis was sort of making the point about the ones planted around. You'll plant a tree which is, quote, a canopy tree, that everybody is blessed, this is a canopy tree. But honestly, you will not know for at least 10 years how it moves in terms of its real canopy, notwithstanding every expectation, because a lot of it has to do with the root structure, and if there are blockages and irrigation, you know, if they're properly watered, mineral content of your soil, I mean, all kinds of things. I would rather, you know, from the beginning, I've always pushed this notion of some kind of easy way to both meet density and meet canopy. But saying that you have to plant a tree that's going to reach a certain canopy radius, or whatever the right term is harder to figure out. I think it's easier to say, plant a tree that is a canopy tree. If you've removed the canopy tree, and you have to have at least 1 canopy tree of your 3, you can have more. But the ones that are, quote, the protected trees are those 3 trees that meet density, one of which must be canopy off of a list that's maintained by the Office of the City Arborist. So
Well,
that you-
that's pretty close. I was hoping to get more canopy, and I was hoping to count, I mean, even a short Japanese maple is gonna spread 10 foot and cover. So to me, that's a
not
canopy.
No, it's not.
But okay, so maybe,
Trust me.
From above,
maybe
it
the
looks
word
like it's-
canopy needs to be dropped. What I'm looking at is a tree, what do you call a tree that shades the ground and keeps it green from above? That's pretty much whatever you call those trees. You know, not a tiny little pine tree.
Gene is going to speak. I just want to tell you that there are professional views in this town that neither that Japanese maple or all those crepe myrtles that provide shade are trees.
Correct.
So let's just,
But they are in my,
No,
they
I'm
are in
sorry.
my thing, so.
What I'm hearing is talk about how to measure, say, canopy or shade or whatever for the entire city. What's gonna happen is, we're gonna be restricted to doing that only in R1. Because R2 right now will not meet any of these criteria,
right.
and commercial's already exempt. So if we're talking about a 1 square mile city, we're talking about maybe
That's why I was.
So
A third of a square mile?
40% is.
40% of the entire city is is a lot different than 40% of the R1.
Well, that's why I
Exactly.
asked what the 40% was, because it's
something about my
creating
street,
a
on
huge
Hickman
burden.
Street in the Ocean Block, there's probably not a single lot that had 3 trees. Because of the way that they were built back when they were built.
Right.
But if they came and wanted to add on a swimming pool in their backyard, then they would have to,
Most of these,
That's
most
their
of them
ability.
houses though.
to the best of their ability, they would have to add a tree.
These are like townhouses and,
Right.
and condos, so
Right.
there's not a possibility of that happening.
Right. Well, then, again, they're gonna be grandfathered in, but if there is a possibility of it
But
happening,
if we have the definition
Right.
from
But
the
if you're looking
beginning,
prospectively, right.
covering parts of the city that's not gonna be affected by it, that probably doesn't help.
and I understand, you know, again, the terminology and stuff, I am not an expert on, but again, I can't see the difference in saying a tree that hopefully will have a 20-foot canopy in 10 years or whatever you guys wanna put, versus a tree that hopefully will be 4 inches in caliper and, you know, I mean, to me, it's kind of the caliper of the tree doesn't matter. There's pine trees that are this big that don't cover anything. They just stand tall. That's what my yard has. I'd love to have trees that actually have a canopy. You know, so to me, again, I just think that the whole look of the town, if it's a crepe myrtle and it's a beautiful crepe myrtle and it shades part of the front yard, then it should be counted, you know? I mean, and then we'd have the separate part that covers the city's part of maintaining the parks and the streets to help make up that 40% or whatever calculation you guys are talking about. But we got to deal with one thing at a time. Right now, we're dealing with the problem right now is residential homeowners building lots or not maintaining their trees. So all the other stuff is something we'd have to get to down the road. But the part of the code I think that we're dealing with right now, and that's creating the problem, and that's causing the mitigation, and that's causing the lawsuits, and it's causing Liz headaches, is this part that we've spent a year and a half trying to rewrite. And we're still measuring trees. So again, I only threw this out now because Sandy was gonna throw it out. I was ready to throw in the towel just to get the thing moving and go on with what we had. But since you brought that up, and it's very similar to what I said, and if his way is better, but it's the bottom line is the same. It's a very simplified version that's going to take research on the part of the city arborist to come up with a list of trees and, you know, what do we do with them? And somebody that knows something like you do about the difference in terminology. We define our terms. Is it a canopy tree? Is it a coverage tree? Is it a shade tree? Is it a, you know, whatever? I don't know how. Is it a shadow code? I don't know, you know. So, but I was trying to incorporate the street trees in as something that people would say, hey, I'm getting my advantage out of the street tree. I'm going to take care of it. It's not mine, but it's, you know, this is part of my percentage. It enables me to have a shed in my backyard. I'm going to, you know, so it,
I mean, that's an interesting example. You know, I think one of the challenges with street trees, and one of the things that's made this really confusing, is even when you go back to the comprehensive development plan, the last one, and they talk about, someone in there is talking about how we're going to have a treed city, and whoever wrote it at that time said, well, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to take back the streets. You know, we're going to plant street trees in every street. Now, again, I'm gonna quote the Davy Tree Study. When they came through, they found 1,337 places in 2010 where trees were dead or dying, or trees could be planted. Out of that 137 trees, they only identified 7 spots where they thought a high canopy tree could be planted. And there are many places
Are you
where,
saying on public
on
property?
public property,
7.
7. And there are many places along streets where you've got a strip that's about 1 foot. When the Mayor's Tree Committee brought a group in from Frederick, Maryland, who'd done a very successful public and private tree planting program, we drove around with this couple, and we were pointing out areas on the street, and they were going, "No, you can't plant a tree there." I mean, they wouldn't plant anything in a spot less than 3 to 4 feet. I mean, yeah, or it wouldn't ensure the healthy growth of the tree. They just wouldn't invest in it. So we're really challenged to have street trees, but there are some situations where
Why does it have
it'd
to
be
be,
rare.
just out of ignorance, why does it
Yeah.
have to be a high canopy tree? What is the
Okay.
difference between a high canopy tree and just a canopy, just a tree covering?
Okay. Well, it's kind of the difference between what your experience is of the town from the ground and what a survey, what a satellite picture would look like from the sky.
But who cares what it looks like from the sky? As far as if environmentally it does the same thing to be a lower canopy tree.
Well, one could argue that environmentally it wouldn't. The taller, older trees, what can I say? They do all things that trees do better than smaller, younger trees. And in addition to species like oaks support wildlife.
But if
They
it doesn't
provide-
fit, and if there's
Well-
only so many places you can put it, would,
It's, my personal, everybody here knows what my kind of bias is, but, my bias is that high canopy in Rehoboth, which is kind of our characteristic skyline, which I believe is what we're talking about when we talk about our unique wooded seaside character, is made up of loblolly pines and oaks and maples. And, my fear or the possibility is that we could look like Ocean City or Dewey Beach or Fenwick Island or any kind of residential development that lets crepe myrtles or Japanese maples or whatever, stand in for trees. In other words, if there are no trees taller than houses, which the current code permits.
I was suggesting 3 of them, but you're telling me you can't fit 3 on the lot. So
Not
what
three,
number would
not
you
3
say?
high canopy. I think 1 high canopy
Okay.
tree per lot is ambitious.
So 1 high canopy and 2 shade trees. Does that work?
No, probably not. Probably not.
Well, one thing we've got, this is a pedestrian town, and one of the things that I've noted is that we have a lot of people that plant trees, even in the space between the street and sidewalk,
Right.
that for the first 10 years the tree is there, you run into it because it's not tall enough, the trunk is not tall enough.
Right.
And to me, that's irritating. That doesn't help matters, it makes things worse.
And a lot of the ones that you can plant there really aren't going to provide much shade.
That's correct.
I mean, they're good, they're going to be small, they're going to stay small. The other thing is that most of our streets have power lines on one side. And you can't plant a tree underneath a power line that's going to reach any
Well, you can,
height.
but tell Margaret will drop by and.
Well, yeah,
hack your
and
tree
kind of,
down,
and
right.
kind of
Make it martini glass.
butcher the thing.
So you feel that this, with the caliper and the mitigation and all that stuff, is gonna better fit?
No, I don't, not necessarily, I
So-
don't, because I'll tell you why. I don't think the mitigation helps toward the goal,
Right.
because
It's punitive.
the
It's nothing but
result,
punitive.
the result is we end up with lots of, to me, kind of low-quality trees on lots. and we end up with money.
It's on the list, it's
Well,
acceptable.
because you have to have a certain number,
Right.
but
You
that
get your-
just means you just gotta pack them in there. They're not necessarily gonna offer the benefits of that nicer trees that are gonna get taller. And then the mitigation fund, if you get mitigation instead of replanting, then you end up with money that's sitting in an account that isn't able to be spent to actually replace the trees that have been removed.
Money might grow on trees, but it doesn't give you shade.
So, Sturgis,
Yeah.
humor me here for a second.
Those are my problems with the kind of the current mitigation. And the other thing, I mean, when you talk to Liz about this, she kind of says that whole DBH replacement kind of thing, inch for inch and tree for tree. What she said to me, and I think to us, is that formula is really, she has seen that applied where you have large developments, where you've
Yeah,
got
that's right.
someone going in and developing,
Subdivisions.
Where there
subdivisions.
is land clearing.
Where
as
there's
opposed to-
land
As
clearing
opposed to tree replacement.
as
or
opposed to
removal.
tree replacement. So her impression is
Exactly.
that wasn't a good fit from the get-go for our situation. So, the replacement, the whole idea of tree for tree, I'm not opposed to that at all. My concern, two concerns, one is somehow maintaining canopy. In other words, here's a fear, like if you said nobody has to have more than 3 trees, what we might see is people just almost clear cutting lots that have been forested for years.
That's what I want you to sell me on.
And do that, like right now. And then we would kind of have this, and I'm not saying I know how to solve this. I'm just putting this forward as a possible kind of risk to quality of life and benefits from trees in the city.
Yeah, well, you could have
To
two-
Susan's concept.
You could have two code
With your
sections,
formula,
Uh-huh.
I mean.
existing and new development. Okay, you could break it down that way, all right? And basically, you could have something like what I said for existing properties, people that are trying to add something on, okay? And then you could have a new development, all right? New development, basically, under most building codes, is anything that is 50% or more of the value of the home being replaced. So in other words, if you have a house that's worth, $500,000 and you are going to make it worth $751,000, you have, done over 50%. And that's when building code requirements kick in. That's when a lot of other requirements will start kicking in. Like if you're remodeling a commercial building to a certain extent, over 50%, you have to sprinkle it. Whereas if you're not, you don't. So, you could have a new development and a previous one if that's what you're worried about. But I happen to agree with Sandy. I don't think you can penalize people that happen to have a lot that has a lot of trees on it.
See, because what happens is, if you follow the formula that is in the current draft that we're discussing, if you have 3, 4, or 5 trees on your property, that provision is going to give you an incentive not to plant another tree. Because if you ever have to then remove a tree, you will be paying these fines and you'll be paying possibly the escrow funds and all that kind of stuff. I am perhaps a little bit of Alice in Wonder. I may be just thinking too that people are well-meaning, but I think most people will plant what they want on their property to enjoy their property. That you will tell them what the minimum is, but they will exceed the minimum. What I don't want to have happen, I don't think people will clear their properties and all this kind of stuff. We have very little residential property left that has not already got a house sitting on it. I mean, look, and I have a 5,000 square foot house that's 60% cover and 40%. I know exactly what you can plant and not plant on a house, on the land. Excuse me. I think it is a good formula for this town to say, here's what our minimum expectation of you is. That you've got to have, for the 5,000 square foot lot, you've got to have at least 3 trees, one of which is a canopy tree, however we define canopy. You can have more. And by the way, we're not going to penalize you or make regulatory hurdles for you if you need to remove one of those more later, or replace it, or, you know, move it, or anything else like this. But we want to have a basic minimum in this town. We encourage you to do more. We're not going to penalize you, though, if you have more and you need to thin it out, you need to, you know, it's now overgrown. This thing penalizes somebody.
It does.
It
Who-
scares people. It's just downright scary.
okay.
No, it
and
says,
confusing.
I live here. That's what it says.
I
live here
agree
and have this whole
100%.
burden.
I motion to approve everything he just said.
Because that's basically where we should be going, is making it better for people to live here and be happier here.
And I agree that most people, developers aside, most people are not gonna come in and make their property ugly or whatever, but they might wanna put up a playground for their kids that needs, you know, or put up a swing set or something.
So,
You know?
I have 2 points I want to make. One, forgive me.
Sure.
One is, and, you know, I'm hearing you, but I guess I was motivated, driven by the fear or the concept that we would be jeopardizing what we have, okay? Now, you're saying that people won't do that, but I'm convinced that wouldn't happen. They would take these things down and there would be nothing that would protect what we already have, okay? Let me just, and my second point is actually, I want to digress just for a moment, footnote if you will, to talk about the escrow arrangement. The escrow is only applicable to, and this is Liz's concept, to,
Oh, I saw her fingerprints all over it.
yeah, to have people, to ensure that people will, in fact, do what the city wants them to do. So, you know, you put your money in escrow, you wait a year, you get your inspection. If it's cool, you get your money back. I mean, that was the concept that she was applying there, so.
And
Okay.
without Liz here to ask, but, you know, Mike, you were talking about maybe your little Alice in Wonderland about thinking people do the right thing. And my thought is, I'm just guessing, that Liz is saying she has a hard time
She does. That's what she said.
managing people.
To get them to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people doing it, and the city maybe is understaffed, I don't know, but following up on and making sure that those things are done is onerous on the city. And so this is kind of seen as an incentive, if you will, for people to actually satisfy the requirement, the 3-tree requirement. Because my guess is that this isn't happening, that this is a hardship for her to monitor and enforce that. And again, I'm guessing, she's not here for us to ask. The other thing that I worry about is, I wish I came here with more solutions. I don't, and I kind of apologize for coming late to the party and sort of throwing all this stuff in. But to me, these are the critical issues that we have to settle. Is what is it that we're trying to preserve? You know, what are we trying to preserve? What are we trying to, you know, see going forward? And, you know, the other thing you were talking about is that people want to enjoy their property. You know, I am a student of trees and still a poor one and still a beginner. But in my experience, I'm not sure that a lot of civilians know a whole lot about trees. And, you know, if left to their own devices, are liable to be influenced by a landscaper with the newest thing to put on your property, which may look pretty, but may give very little value to the community as a whole.
But we're still gonna
Or
have an
may
approved
even-
list.
We
It's
are,
gotta
we
be
are.
one of the trees
We are.
on the approved
The other
list.
thing is that I'm very aware that Liz and people that work for landscaping companies and tree companies have said, you know, this code doesn't allow for re-landscaping. You know, I would also say that, you
The
know,
code doesn't allow for
re-landscaping, and it's what Sandy's saying. It's like if you've got existing trees, but you would rather have an oak than a holly, or you'd rather have, you know, you're gonna be penalized.
Okay.
You can't come in and
Okay, I
change that without being penalized.
Okay.
So,
So let's, if
Well,
I
but
may, let me,
I'm sorry, you know, if you are going to remove a protected tree, which is what this says,
Okay.
and let's assume the protected tree is one of the 3 medium density, even though Hoyte is saying it's every tree that's 6 inches or more, which I disagree with. But whatever it is, it says before you remove any protected tree, which could, according to Hoyte, is every one on your property that's 6 inches or more, you have to enter into an escrow agreement with the city to ensure the health of the replacement tree. It then says the escrow amount shall be between $600 and $6,000. Doesn't say how that's determined, who determines that, what are the guidelines. It then says the agreements doesn't say.
Okay.
The agreement shall be for a minimum of 12 months after the replacement inspection and subject to follow-on inspections, doesn't say by whom, of the replanted tree. It says to the extent it is determined, doesn't say by whom, that the replanted tree is dead, diseased, or otherwise not in compliance with the provisions of this article or tree removal permit, then the property owners give a notice to correct the deficient. So their money is still tied up. They're using other money to do the planting. You have to assume that if they're removing a protected tree, they also have a permit to plant the tree. So it's all part of one operation. To me, this seems terribly onerous. There are no guidelines. There is no structure. It's punitive to the citizens of this city. And then it says the escrow funds will be closed and funds released to the property owner when the city arborist verifies compliance after follow-up inspection. Doesn't say how long that could be. Well, I don't want to be the person who tells somebody, just put up $6,000 because you're removing a tree that's 6 inches in caliber.
to clarify, if I may.
The other thing you're doing is, and what we're talking about here is protecting, for lack of a better term, tree huggers. What about people that want sunshine on their lots? They come and buy a beach resort community house because they want to have a big patio in the back for their kids to play, and they don't want a shade tree because they want sun.
Then they put their 3 trees, 1 canopy and 2 whatever you want to call them, in the front. That's why I think it needs to be simplified. But again, I know I make things, try and make them very simple, but I'm the majority. You know, these experts are the minority. So
I'm not opposed to Susan, I'm not opposed to you simplifying. I mean, truly, if I had been here at the beginning, and this is not to undermine or denigrate or, criticize your all's approach to this, that would have been my preference, would be to start with, let's start, what is it that we're doing, and write this so a 3rd grader could understand it, and then see what we need to add back into it if we've left stuff out.
well, I think our approach was to continue with what other people had started and try and make it better. And
Yeah, but
we didn't write the first one, so.
I know, or the second one.
So rather than grinding along further here, I'm going to offer a thought. Because I think it's sounding pretty clear to me we have a consensus, or at least a majority of opinions about the direction that we're going. And so I'm thinking maybe we need to take a step back. Let me draft something that kind of reflects what we've just enunciated here this morning, okay? Your position, Jean's, Susan's position. Give you an opportunity to put in your 2 cents. But I think what we need to do is to say, look, we're heading down this path. We've had advice from the city arborist. However, there's different thinking on this issue, and maybe we need to take, God help Pat Caluzzi, take another look at this in light of these thoughts that are coming out, and take that as a presentation to the Board of Commissioners and let them know just what's afoot here.
Could I offer
You
a
certainly
possible
may.
alternative?
Yeah, you certainly may.
I would love to have Susan take a stab at a simple version.
I think that's what I'm saying.
Okay, but
I
I'd
think that's
like
what
to
I'm
see,
saying.
rather than Susan has this in her head.
As long as I can leave blanks for the part that I don't know.
Yeah.
I would be happy to do it, but again, I'm not going to spend 3 years going to school to be an arborist to do this. I will
No,
write the
no.
basics and you guys can fill it in with the expert
I would
material,
just,
but
yeah, I
I
mean,
don't
to me,
have that information.
to me,
So-
I would find it refreshing to have a kind of a different approach. I just look at a different approach, completely different than what we're doing.
That's kind of what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Is your dad okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to get them.
So gentlemen, what, I mean, can
I
I get
will-
your
I
thoughts?
would just commend to my committee members my email to them dated September 18th with all my comments on this section. A lot of which are very consistent with the discussion we've had this morning.
Okay.
Can you say
Do you-
one more time what you said earlier, just what you said in the very beginning that made me even bring this up? What was your bottom line?
I said that I continue to advocate a simple formula. When you're dealing with and it ties into replacement issues as well as tree planting issues. You have to start with the premise of what's the minimum, what's the baseline we're starting with. My baseline is, and of course you would use a multiplier for larger lots, but for a 5,000 square foot lot, you have to have 3 trees. That's density. One of those 3 trees has to be a canopy tree that is, and Susan, it's all in this email I sent out. A canopy tree that's off a list that the city maintains. So we all know a canopy tree is a canopy tree, there's no question. If you are going to remove one of those 3 trees, then you have to go through a process. I don't want it to be as punitive as what's set out here, but you go through a process that if you're going to remove one of those trees, then you have to replace the tree. And if the tree you're removing is the canopy tree, you have to replace it with a tree of similar quality and style or type or whatever the right phrasing is of that canopy tree. If you have trees beyond what you need for your minimum, you are permitted to remove them, reposition them, plant more, all of which without permits. That's my simple approach, so that you're not covered by the tree removal section, you're not covered by the tree planting section. I think that allows, to sort of pick up on Gene's point, those people who want to have a sunny backyard may only have slightly more than the minimum. They'll probably have more, but they'll only have slightly more. Those people who like to have shade because they get their sun down at the beach, they're going to put in more trees. They may not put trees that are as tall as their houses and more so, but they're going to be trees that provide them shade. They're going to look at the way the sun moves. They're going to position them in such a way so they may learn over time that they should have planted the tree over here instead of there to get the shade. I want people to be able to do all that without feeling terrible burden of home ownership, property ownership in this city. That's my simple approach.
That's pretty much what I had said. So.
Gene?
I concur.
You concur?
So we need to look at everything we've done for the past year and a half as what we all really, really needed was to learn about trees, because I didn't know any of this before we started this. So it's not like we wasted our time. We now
Well, I don't
have
think we wasted
the
our time.
knowledge that we need.
Right.
But I would really like, and in the future, for other things that are going to come up, I think we need to do it the same way. Just start out with a very, where we're going, and then we'll figure out how to get there.
Get there simply.
Exactly.
Simple. Start simple.
Exactly.
Try to keep it.
Because there's going to be more codes coming after this one that we all have to relearn and figure out things. But now we have a tree expert, so it
Well,
really helps.
we have a student. Thank you,
So-
thank you. For me, I mean, again, and I'm beating kind of a dead horse, but the challenge is sort of balancing, what can I say? Balancing the quality of life for people who live and visit the city and the value that trees give to the city with private property rights. And the city has over time stated and maintained that the trees that we have are a major contributor to the value of the town, the value of the real estate, the attractiveness of this as a place to visit, to walk, bicycle, etc., and to the value of the homes. So, that's kind of that's the balancing act.
Just point out one thing that popped in my head. That happened to one of my clients a couple of years ago in Country Club Estates. He wanted to get a permit to put a deck on the back of his house. So he went to get it, and he was told he was non-conforming because he didn't have 2 parking spaces off the street. In order to be able to put the deck on the back of his house, he had to cut down trees in order to be able to put 2 parking spaces on there. That's the city being at odds with itself.
Which is often the case.
And, but you know, we've got to think about who wins out in that case.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So,
That's a good point, Jimmy, thanks.
I think I'm ready to move forward here. And I'm sorry if I've brought you in to only work for an hour, but I think we've pretty much concluded what we need to do here.
I agree.
Except I think, Sandy, you should stay and help us with this. Because you,
Yeah.
we're very close to heading in the right direction where,
You have my email of September.
Yes, I do.
We do.
Yes, I do.
It sounds
Yes, I
like
do.
we're.
So here's what,
Susan, you know where I live.
yeah.
May I knock on your door as well?
Anytime.
Okay.
Hey, we sit under your tree.
All 40 of them.
Okay.
So,
in light of what we've just done, I'm not so sure, well, point of information. I'm going on vacation, and I'm gonna be away till like the 3rd week in October. And we've got a meeting scheduled like a week later. And I don't know if my wife is gonna let me do the kind of things that I think are gonna be necessary to do here, because we've really pivoted. But so what I'm gonna suggest, I'm now down to the next item, setting a meeting date. What I would like to do, if I may, is say, let's leave October 25, 10 a.m. as our next meeting, but with the understanding that I might want to cancel it if I can't come up with something, you know, which you then have in hand and have an opportunity to digest before we meet
I
again.
thought it was the 30th.
25th or the 30th? I've got 30
I
on
have
the
30th too.
agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry, how did I get 25 then? You're quite right.
Okay.
It was actually the day before I was supposed to have my surgery, so. I'm sorry, it's October 30, 10 a.m., forgive me. But anyway, that's still only basically a week.
Are we asking Susan to kind of
Oh, I
work
would
this out
definitely, I
and
asked her
share
that
this
before,
with
yes,
us?
I would
Okay,
like.
I will do this as long as, seriously, you guys honestly think that we're on the right track here.
I think we're
I do.
definitely pivoting.
And if you want to
Then I will
talk,
do it,
if
and
you
I'm
want
gonna
to
leave
talk to
blank.
me
Yep.
before, you know, between now and October 30th,
Yeah,
any way I
yeah.
can
Okay.
assist, so just saying.
All right, and
Okay.
just one more time, just to make sure I know, we can email back and forth as long as we are all included, correct?
you can email back and forth, but when people respond,
Yeah,
they have to respond separately just to
Separately,
you,
Not to the group.
not to the group.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
So,
It's
for
not
example, I
online.
can send my email with thoughts to all of you. If you have a response, you should only send it to me, you shouldn't send it to the group.
Yeah.
And Anna's nodding her head yes.
She says that's.
I'm not even gonna ask why, I'm just gonna go with it,
It's
because
because
okay.
it's
It means
not
we've
on-
con-
I got it.
We have to be on the record.
But that's
and
one of
it
the
means
reasons
that
I
we're
haven't
now-
been answering
That would be a
yours, 'cause
meeting.
I was
That's a meeting.
confused
That's a
on-
meeting if we all
As
talk
it's
on
defined.
God
one.
forbid.
Yeah.
Okay,
all right. So with Ann's permission, I'm gonna move to go to the order as a last item before we leave, to give Sandy an opportunity to offer a thought about an issue that came up at our last meeting.
Oh, no, it's
No?
very simple.
Oh,
At the meeting before last,
or
at
whatever.
the August 7th meeting,
I'm sorry.
we had a preliminary discussion of my redraft of section 25336,
Oh, I'm
administrative
sorry.
appeals.
I totally misunderstood.
And at that meeting, you all asked me to take the comments and redraft the provision. I did redraft that provision. I sent it to the members of this committee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I watched the video of the September 4th meeting, which I couldn't attend because I was enjoying pasta and very fine wine in Italy. But I noted that it was not discussed. So because this is my last meeting on the committee, I just would like to, with your permission, give it to Ann to put it into the record,
By all
so you
means.
all have it
By all means.
to look at the next time. Now, there are provisions in here, for example, dealing with mitigation and an alternative approach to mitigation. You may decide, as a result of these discussions, to totally do away with mitigation, but I would like to leave this with you, to share it with you, because it does reflect thought and, unfortunately, in my case, a lot of experience on this subject.
Forgive me, I totally misunderstood what you,
That was it.
okay.
Otherwise, I'll take this moment of good and welfare to thank you all for being such great colleagues.
Thank you.
How much I've enjoyed being on
Thank
this
you.
committee
Yeah,
and
it's-
working with you, and
Good.
always glad to talk.
You will be, oh, okay. I'm gonna hold you to that. Yeah, you will be missed. All right, well, so if everybody's good with this, I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 11:05. Thank you very much.